Welcome back to the Blend podcast. I'm your host, Mike Ruff, and in this episode we're revisiting the topic of electric vehicles. We welcome back Matt Cleevely of Cleevely EV to challenge him with some of the hard-hitting arguments on why the transition to EVs might not be as big as we once thought. Or maybe they will. Let's join Matt from his very busy workshop in Cheltenham to try and figure out what it all means for independent garages. Matt, how are you?
Very good, thanks Mike. Yes, thanks for having me back on the podcast.
We were keen to get you back on for your latest thoughts on electric vehicles because it seems as if the appetite for electric vehicles is cooling.
It's all about headlines for me, and there seems to be this general hate for EVs, whether in the trade or out the trade, and so if you believe the headlines, then sales are falling, but it's not true to life, and there's still a very vibrant market. Just to add on that, there are over 1 million EVs on the road now since they've been launched, so it's becoming quite a considerable number. I'm not even including plug-in hybrids, PHEVs, mild hybrids. Electrification is a wider thing, and it's becoming quite a big market.
When you look at the figures, and we'll dig into those shortly, it becomes very apparent that this isn't a niche market that we're talking about here. EVs are here now and in big numbers, so why do you think there's a reluctance for more independent garages to tap into the EV market?
So our governing bodies, the RMIs, the people like that, the IMIs were saying, get EV trained, get EV trained, get EV trained. All the magazines were talking about it. It was a hot topic, and there was a lot of interest in it. What I hear back from the garages is that they're not seeing EV work coming through. They may have done the training and that's sort of filtering through. So I do think that garages are thinking, well, I'm not seeing this work. Why is the point? I've spoken to my mate who owns a garage. He's not seeing EV works coming through as well. So what's the point in me getting trained on electric vehicles when there is no work? None of my customers have EVs.
Yeah, it's a valid argument though, isn't it? If you're busy working on petrol and diesel, why get distracted by EVs?
So it's a chicken and egg situation then, isn't it? My customers didn't have electric vehicles. I created a customer base that had electrified vehicles by doing the training and wanting to see the cars through our workshop. I wanted to get involved with that technology. I wanted to see them come through and to fix them and to learn from them. Don't get me wrong, it's massively stressful at points because I kind of thought, well, I've thrown myself in the deep end here. But if you do the training, if you buy some basic kit and you want to get involved, you want to see that work come through, then the next thing is a conversation about marketing. How do you market your business as an EV-ready garage? Now, is that through some of the groups that are popping up, your Service Shores, your Hevras, things like that? They're great as well. We're members of both of those. But that on its own isn't going to drive work to your workshop. You need to let your current customer base know that you are qualified and knowledgeable about electric vehicles. You may want to introduce electric courtesy cars, and that starts a conversation. Something like 57% of EV owners will sort out an EV qualified garage in order to repair those vehicles. So your customers are probably thinking about electrification for the next car, but they don't know that you're thinking about working on those cars either. They don't know that you might already be qualified to do that. If you don't shout about it, and suddenly those customers are going to go elsewhere for that EV car that's in their family. And once they found an EV specialist that works on ICE as well, are they going to be coming back to you if they can take all of their family cars to one garage?
Okay, so hit us with the numbers. How big is the EV market, and what can we expect to see in the next 2 to 3 years in the aftermarket?
At the start of this year, we broke the 1 million EVs sold into the UK market stat. It's been building and building and building. So the oldest one, so the Nissan Leaf, first generation of Nissan Leaf, got onto the UK's road in 2011. So we're talking 13 years already. We see plenty of them still through our workshop. Although we're kind of at the tipping point with those now that some of the repairs are not necessarily high voltage. It can be just car repairs. If you communally have tyres and steering and suspension work all needing doing, is that car now worth it? And this is an interesting point where we've seen a maturity to that market already, to the point of at what point does this vehicle get written off or become uneconomical to repair. So this is a very mature market in the UK already, but sort of relevant to our trade, and I like to bring this up when I talk. So we're in 2024 now. So in 2020, so this is cars seeing their second MOT this year, there were 108,000 BEVs alone. Only BEVs, so not FEVs, not hybrids or anything, BEVs alone, 108,000. That jumped to 190,000 BEVs registered in 2021. So to put that in perspective, there's 25,000 MOT centres, I think it is. They've got the share of 190,000 BEVs alone that need MOTing this year. I hope they don't all come here. But we're seeing a huge proportion and a huge number of Tesla Model 3s that are having their first MOT and picking up the work off the back of that. In 2022, that grew to 234,000 BEVs. So next year's MOT car park is culmination of those previous figures that I've mentioned, plus another nearly 250,000 EVs. And then we've broken in 2023, it was 314,000 EVs on the road. So these numbers aren't dropping, these numbers are increasing. And across those, you've got nearly 1 million cars of not very old, they're not old cars, that will need MOTing and the subsequent work off the back of them, of the MOT failures. And one thing that does concern me is that I speak to a scarily high proportion of EV owners that think they don't need to have their car serviced as well. So it's our job as a trade, when we're seeing them for MOT, just to have a conversation about servicing. And servicing isn't complex. It isn't, you don't need to go over the top. It's kind of money for nothing for us, because you cover quite a lot of it in an MOT, and then you've got fluids, brake fluid, battery coolant, the 12-volt battery, which is vital to any EV. All of that needs to be checked and tested. So there is a potential income that we could be missing out on, just with a lack of education of the owners of these cars in the first place. And I think it's our trade's job to point out the significant difference between an MOT, which is a minimum requirement basic safety check on the day, and servicing that is forecasting a year's worth of roadworthiness and reliability.
That's a good point, and you just about managed to make it there before the buzzer, so well done for that. Do you think the government's recent announcement pushing back the sales ban of new petrol and diesel cars to 2035, is that responsible for the decreased interest within the industry?
Certainly the earlier drop in interest within our trade, and maybe some of the EV sales of new cars might come from the fact that the current government put it back from 2030 to 35. So the public probably saw that as a reason to stall and hold off buying an electric vehicle. But underneath that sort of initial headline of 2035, the ban on ICE vehicles, there is this the fact that vehicle manufacturers must ensure, and this year ensure that 22% of all new cars on the road in the UK are zero emission, and that figure increases annually up to 2030 to 80%. Otherwise, the VMs will get fined. I think it's 15 grand from memory for each non-zero emission vehicle that's sold outside of the allowance. So it's very much in the vehicle manufacturer's interests to continue to produce and push the sale of electric vehicles to the public, because they will financially lose out. So that 2030 deadline still sort of remains for vehicle manufacturers, and that is just the ban of ICE engine production and sale from then on. So there's a lot more to it than just the headline grabbing of everyone assumed, we don't need an EV until 2035. But this is a sliding scale thing, and there will be lots of towns and cities that develop and introduce ULEZs to stop emissions, because all of the local governments as well, they're all tasked with trying to remove emissions from their towns and cities. So we'll see more park and rides to promote active travel, more bus lanes, and EVs sort of help cure the problem of emissions in towns and cities. So putting in ULEZs, so ultra low emission zones where only EVs can drive, or you get fined with an ICE vehicle, they're going to pop up in every town and city. And off the top of my head, London's the obvious one, and that's been extended again to pretty much anything within the M25. But Bath, Bristol, Oxford, all round me, they have ULEZs, and I've heard in the not too distant past that Cheltenham are considering a ULEZ as well. So it's going to happen, and that will drive up the sales of EVs, which mean that they're going to end up in our workshops more and more.
The sales ban and the incremental phasing out of ICE, which you mentioned there, are part of the zero emissions mandate. And you're absolutely right. At least 22% of all new cars sold in the UK this year must be zero emissions. So to coin that political phrase, and I hate to do it, but we're already on the road to zero emissions, the road to that ICE sales ban. So with all of that in mind, should garage owners be making business decisions on the back of this mandate?
Well, we all know you can't trust a politician, and they will change with the wind. So I wouldn't base any business decision as a workshop on what the government say or do or promote at any one time. So this is something that's being driven by the EU, by the global demand to reduce carbon emissions, and transportation is a big impactor on that. So this isn't going away. This isn't a UK government thing. This is a worldwide thing where every government is under pressure to reduce emissions. So regardless of what our governments say and whether they're going to swing it one way or another between 2030 or 35, or even bring it closer again, zero emission vehicles are here to stay and will be, and I use that term zero emission vehicles because that doesn't necessarily mean BEVs or FEVs or high voltage. It could be hydrogen combustion comes to the fore. It could be that hydrogen fuel cells, although they're becoming less and less because it is a BEV, but with complicated technology involved in it as well. But yeah, I'm not against hydrogen, but hydrogen then is another infrastructure to build. It's transportation of another thing, another fuel type. It's specialist tanks, it's specialist pumps, it's specialist insurance for fires and explosion. It's another beast on its own for public personal vehicles. And I think hydrogen will be mainly to do with public service vehicles and HGVs, rather than filtering down to our customers' vehicles, those being personal cars and vans.
Okay, so I thought it would be interesting to throw some counter-arguments to you, Matt. They're loud arguments, so let's address them, because I think they're significant factors in deciding whether to make your garage EV ready or not. So, Matt, if you're up for the challenge, let's start with a big one. The grid won't handle the mass adoption of electric vehicles.
The grid connection is an interesting one. So National Power or the National Grid are very, very aware of the electrification and the need for EV chargers. What they struggle with, or currently struggling with, is having that big grid connection that a charging hub would need. But they're getting there and getting the infrastructure in for those quick enough, or as they're developed. So that's one argument. But when it comes to if mass adoption was to happen with EVs, and I don't for a minute think that we're going to be looking at 100% EV car park or BEV car park. It's not going to happen because they're not for everyone. But the National Grid very much welcomed that because with clever technology, things like dynamic load balancing, we're already seeing it. So I'm an Octopus Energy customer. I can tell Octopus Energy what vehicle I have, and if I decide I'm going to charge at home, I can plug in, and Octopus will delay my charge as long as I tell them what time I need to leave and how much charge I'll need at the time. They'll delay my charge until peak hours of the evening, so it's not a case that everyone's with an EV is going to come home at 6 o'clock at night, plug it into their house and add to that real peak power where there's cooking going on. EVs can load balance the grid, and when we've got more technology when it comes to bi-directional charging and things, so that will add power to the grid from EV batteries. So the idea behind V2G, as it's called, is that you get home at night, you plug your car in, then you'll run your house off the remaining battery power in your car, and then the minute the load is reduced on the grid, and as long as there's time to do so overnight to charge your car again, it'll flip and the grid will charge your car, so returning that used energy back in. So it's almost like the cars will actually take the problem away, and they will develop and produce an answer to that problem by being able to connect to the grid and being part of it. So mini power stations on driveways is the way to think of it, rather than the grid having to create that electricity to put onto the grid.
That's really genuinely very interesting. I wasn't aware of that at all, but I'm going to throw it straight back at you because electric vehicles take too long to charge.
So I'm sat at work today, we've got solar on our workshop, and there's a car one of our cars outside charging off the solar, because otherwise I'm sending it to the grid. So I don't need to charge, but I'm at work, the car's sat doing nothing. We're producing electricity on our roof, putting it into the vehicles that need them, and that will, once that one's charged, it will include customer vehicles as well. So we're giving a value add to a customer bringing an electric vehicle here, because we're not going to be pouring petrol and diesel in the ICE vehicles that we're looking after, but we can add free electricity into our EV customers. I went to Liverpool and back at the weekend in my car, which is a Tesla Model Y. I didn't need to stop and charge, but I chose to on the way up to grab a coffee, stretch my legs, break the journey up. That 15-20 minutes that I stopped to grab a coffee and go to the loo and come back to the car, I topped up whilst I was on my journey. The car would have been sat in the car park otherwise anyway. And I did the same on the way back because it was dinner time. It was time to get something to eat. The car actually started to nag me that I'm going to reach my charge limit, and that I'd get idle fees and things at the charger if I left it there before I'd finished my meal. So it wasn't even a thing doing a long journey. It's just about factoring it in and thinking differently, and not having a flat to full mentality, not to leave the charge until you're very flat and wait for it to be very full, because it'll slow down charge current after 80%. Yeah. So charging from very low percentage up to 80% will happen very, very quickly, because the battery is waiting for that energy to be put into it. So I've been using electric vehicles for 7 years, using the public charging infrastructure, using our own infrastructure. I don't wait for charging. Just plan your life around it, and it's perfectly fine.
Many say EV range isn't good enough for them.
My car, the technology on the car is so good that on one occasion I've planned my route home and it said, well, you need to stop and charge. You'll get to the charger with 3% charge. Great, that's fine. I did. I got to the charger with 3%. I meant the battery was nice and low, and it charged really, really quickly. It charged at the equivalent of having 1,000 miles of range per hour that was on charge. So I was there for 20 minutes to get from 3% to 73% to get myself home and still then have range for the next day. So, but I can understand why people have range anxiety, but once that just becomes part of the course, and once you've got a bit more confidence with an EV, you can play around that very easily. I don't think we'll ever need to have 500 or 600 mile range batteries. Those kinds of journeys are not done regularly, so not on a daily basis, and if it is, then a battery electric vehicle isn't for you. Or maybe it is to save yourself a load of money if you can charge on your journeys, but otherwise you're carrying around a massive great big battery just to drive locally. The majority of journeys are within a 40-mile radius every day. Now, long gone are the days of the early technology where a battery would max out at 70 or 80 miles. Most new vehicles that we're seeing selling and working on, they have a 200 plus mile range. 200 miles is more than enough.
Okay, but what about the point that we're going to end up with loads of EV batteries in landfill?
Yeah, and I'm still waiting to find out when that'll be. So EVs have been around for a long time, and even as an EV specialist, we're not changing batteries weekly, bi-weekly, even monthly. The number of full battery changes that we've done, you could probably count on a couple of hands over the last 5-6 years. So it's not a massive market thing. EV batteries are very stable, and if they're looked after and treated well, then like a nice engine, it will look after you. Yes, it will deteriorate over time because they don't have infinite numbers of charge cycles, so they will degrade slowly over time, but that degradation is measurable. It's not in an ICE vehicle. So there is a used market for them as well. So if the vehicle is written off because of crash damage, those batteries aren't going into landfill. They are being used for solar storage, for other battery projects, for static storage, for lots of other things. And even if they're not after that, there are now factories in the UK that can recycle 80+% of a lithium ion battery, whether that's in your phone, in your laptop, or out of a car. So it's another false argument and another myth that is being peddled by the mass media just to raise, I don't know, this hatred against EVs that is unnecessary.
Yes, but EVs are too expensive for average income households, aren't they?
In our sales centre, great cars like the Tesla Model 3 and the Kia e-Niro are available for under 20 grand. That's a 3-4 year old car. So what frustrates me is there was this constant call in the early days, and it is early days for battery vehicle technology. That was one of the criticisms. EVs are too expensive, they're too expensive. No one can afford them. The minute, I forget what it was, a year, 18 months ago, Tesla slashed the price of their new cars. Then the criticism is that they don't hold their value, that they depreciate too quickly. There is this hysteria within the media to drive a hatred against EVs, and it's just driven by the big oil companies that are set to lose so much if battery electric vehicle technology continues to grow at the pace that it is. And it is frustrating. We can't win as an EV advocate and lover. We can't win either way of the argument. There's just constantly that's thrown back at us.
Getting more trade specific now.
Keep them coming.
And you're going to like this one. There's nothing to go wrong on an electric vehicle.
Come and check our car park out. Tell me otherwise, and I'll tell you otherwise. So it's still a car first and foremost. So this is one of my arguments to the trade when I do presentations, is it's still a car. So why would you... if you're working on petrols all the time, when diesel started to come to the fray, did you turn them away as a garage owner and to say, well, that's a very different drivetrain, I don't want to work on that anymore? No, you took it on board because it was a car and it was familiar. And yes, it was still a combustion engine, so the familiarities weren't that different. But what we're seeing here is failure of car components. So it really is. So my message to get across is it's still a car. It still has a lot of the things that you know and love and understand. So the electrified drivetrain part of it, that even still has gears, and as in a diff. So it's got gearing inside it, and it's got oils to change, and it's got all the things that you're familiar with. It just is driven by an electric motor and the things that make that work, rather than a combustion engine. So not to overcomplicate it, there's this massive box of weird chemistry that nobody's seen before, and it's just a set of computers on wheels. And yes, at this point in my career, I've become kind of fearful of modern ICE engines and dealing with the DPF and the AdBlues and things like that. I just find a modern petrol engine more stressful than dealing with EVs. They're much simpler to work on, and I'd love to work on them more every day.
The investment needed to be able to tap into that EV market is too much.
But it's not, is the truth of it. So, as with if you're moving into any area of the trade that's slightly different from the normal, with a specialism involved, training get yourself trained. We do some training, but the training will only start with a qualification. Qualifications and training are two different things in my eyes. So yes, there's an element of training to a qualification, but it's there like school, like kids for school. They train you to go through your GCSE for a qualification. But that's basically on what the criteria that's necessary to pass that qualification. Whereas what we're trying to deliver with our training courses is real life scenarios. So when you get one come into your garage, how do you approach that? So the training is very important, and that doesn't have to be paid for training. That can be, let's get hold of an EV, I'll buy one myself and I'll train myself on it, familiarise myself with some tests that I need to develop, test plans on charging. What's the communication like when I plug in that charge cable? We're seeing a lot of charging faults through our workshop. So we've had one of the guys working on a smart car that's apparently not charging this morning. So doing CAN training on the signals that come from the CP and the PP when that cable is connected to the charge port. You can see it in real life then on a picoscope. So it's not a specialist scope. This is a bit of equipment that every good garage should have to be able to diagnose a petrol or diesel car anyway. So we get our picoscope out and we're checking for the signals from the CPPP and making sure that the car is happy with what it's seeing. So, and then over and above training and the qualification aspect of it, having a decent multimeter and insulation tester. I've got a milliohm tester that we use for motor diagnosis and things like that. It depends on how far and how deep you want to get with your diag, but you can cope with those things. And then we've got a very small handful of insulated tools. You don't need to go overboard with that. Having signs out so everyone else in the workshop is aware that there's a live HV, yes, I mean that's common sense and good practice, and having high voltage gloves. But you don't need to go overboard with some of the things that are being sold by the tool manufacturers and suppliers. Don't forget they're doing that because they've got to sustain a business as well, and they see one direction for our trade going, and that is with electrification growing more and more, which is why they're creating products to sustain their own business model with us, and trying to convince those that haven't made that investment already that they need to invest massively in tools and equipment. Battery lifting tables. There are multiple battery lifting tables out there with specialist tilt and slide bits, and you can get single phase ones, and they're very big and very nice. But we use a pallet lifting table that is equivalent. It just has to have a decent kilogram capacity to lift a battery, and I think ours is 800 kilos. It may have costed a couple of grand at the most, but it's not a specialist trade battery lifting table. It is just a piece of equipment that is designed to lift things up and down. So don't overcomplicate it is my advice. Buy the equipment that you know you'll use, and also if you decide that you are going to work on EVs and you want to introduce that work into your workshop, do it incrementally. You don't have to go out and spend thousands of pounds in one go. Start with your safety kit and a few basic insulated spanners and sockets and a decent multimeter and insulation tester. That will be the point where you can actually stop and see and develop from there.
Why do you think there's a general dislike from the trade when it comes to EV?
When I speak to other techs, there's a huge number of them that they go, "Whoa, I'm a petrol head, I'm not going to be driving EVs, they're for wussies." Well, how does that even make sense? Well, I would count myself a petrol head. I built and raced a Hayabusa-powered single-seater car for 10 years. I love acceleration and performance and just a car that drives really well, and my performance Model Y is probably the best, fastest, most fun to drive car that I've ever owned. And until you stick your bum in a seat and you drive these cars with an open mind, I just don't see the problem. But it does seem to be this negativity to not encourage EV adoption and not be part of that, just to see it as something alien that they're potentially scared of. And everyone runs on confidence. You want to feel like you know what you're doing. You don't want to take a customer's car and feel that you're going to let them down or show up your own lack of skills. When we first created EV as a separate business to run alongside Motors, my traditional business, we bought a brand new Tesla Model S dual motor 75 kilowatt hour battery for people to rent off of us. So never gone into car rental, the same as I'd never gone into car sales, but just it was an important thing for me to have a vehicle there for people to try and understand, experience it and understand what's going on and why we promote EVs. So if any garage owners out there, we've still got that car, if they want to come and hire and rent our Tesla Model S for the day, for a week, a weekend, whatever it is, take it back to your workshop. Don't take it to bits, especially if you don't know what you're doing, but just stick it on a ramp and have a look round it and drive it, thrash it, do whatever you want to it. It's not going to wear anything out. It's there to be enjoyed. So come and hire our car, so you don't have to go to a great expense, and then you might hand it back or not want to hand it back, just knowing a little bit more about what it takes to have an EV in your world.
And just to be clear, you're not saying to close the doors on ICE vehicles. Going right back to the beginning of this conversation, you mentioned it's about being perceived as being EV ready. That's the way to start getting EVs through the door while still doing those ICE vehicle jobs.
I still make up 55% of what we do day to day. And I will stress that it's day to day. So when you consider that we've got 6 techs, but 45% of our work is on electric vehicles, I mean, that's you've got to attract a huge number of, if we're doing 20 to 30 jobs a day, we're seeing 15 EVs in through the workshop a day. That's quite big numbers. But we're still reliant on ICE to a certain degree. There is, it's easy to make money out of ICE. You've got the markup on your oils and things like that. So when it comes to servicing, you can make markup on a pollen filter, and every X amount of miles, depending on the make and model, you've got drive unit oil changes where you've got oil that you can mark up. So it can be quite hard to make money out of EV if you're just going to stick to doing an inspection once a year on them. So it's up to the garage to then find fault with them, not make faults up, find faults on them, just to inspect them properly, go through them. But our highest value, invoiced valued vehicle across everything we look after is on an EV. It's on the Tesla Model S. That is our highest value vehicle. Tesla owners will think nothing of having a once a year hit at the garage, and they may need tyres and suspension and brake strip and clean, because that's important. That's an important job to do, where regen's so strong, brakes can stick and not be used. So doing jobs like that, they'll think nothing of having a 4-figure valued invoice. So there's money to be made out there, but embracing and staying up to date with ICE is important too. Yeah, don't turn your back on that. We'd be in trouble if we did, but we're just embracing EV, and it's working massively for our business.
Matt, thanks for being a great sport. You batted off those counter-arguments brilliantly, and I'm sure it's left our listeners with plenty to consider.
No, my pleasure, Mike, and thank you for allowing me the soapbox to preach from.
Thanks, Matt. Matt will be joining us at the Blend in September, where he'll be giving an updated presentation on the EV state of play. So make sure you save the date, Saturday 28th of September, and book your tickets on the Blend website now. Early bird ticket prices are available until the end of June. Please do subscribe to the Blend podcast in your usual podcast player, because we'll be back with more insight very soon. Thanks for listening.